I solicit your attention to Galatians chapter 4. In the book of Galatians, thank you, chapter 4, and I would like to begin reading from verse 1 through and including verse 7. In Galatians chapter 4, and of course Paul is writing to the Galatian church, a group of people who literally were being bombarded by the Judaizers and by the teachers of the law. And it seems as if he is warning them against reversion or going back to Judaism after they have met the carpenter's son from Nazareth, Jesus. You will find great similarity between Hebrews and Galatians, simply because he's dealing with massive apostasy in the book of Hebrews, and he's warning against reversion into Judaism in the book of Galatians. In chapter 4, he is pointing out that the Jews were for a while under the law, but Christ came to redeem and to give both to Jews and Gentiles the adoption of sons. And he opens in 4 by saying, "Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. Even so we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. But when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And because ye are sons, God hath sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Wherefore thou art no more a servant, but a son. And if a son, a joint heir of God through Christ. Howbeit, when ye knew not God, ye did service unto them which by nature are no gods. But now, after that ye have known God, or rather are known of God, don't turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto ye desire again to be in bondage." I want you to look at somebody with all the ebullience you can muster and tell them all curses are off. The curses are off. Look at somebody, and I know it might not be a father, but simply say, "Dad, if you won't love God, I will. I will. I need help. Help me, Lord. Help me on this." It is critical because wherever there is no prevention, there has to be intervention. And it is here where the issues of theology and psychology are extremely pronounced, and that is in the situation of family. Theology then can be seen as an effort of prevention, of course. But if it meets the family too late, the issue of intervention now becomes significant. I make that general opening because I want to point out to you, first of all, that the whole picture of Christianity is one of intervention. It is intervention in the life of man because man has strayed from his pristine quality of creation. Let me put it this way. In Genesis 5:3, Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness. And the son was in his likeness after his image, and he called his name Seth. The word likeness is an interesting word because the etymological root of the word likeness is yada. And according to my research, it occurs commonly and it expresses a multitude of knowledge gained by senses, the yada. It's knowledge gained in the Hebrew thought by the senses or the sensual perception. It has a synonym that's called bin, and it simply means to discern. Because if you have a father and a son in relationship, or a father and his family, it would seem to me that you ought to discern elements of the father in his children. The discerning here becomes not only from a spiritual point of view, because we're going to deal with likeness and image, but discerning comes from realizing that there is genetics that's in the son that has to come from the father. There's genetic proclivity, and of course, if I were to spend a lot of time, not with Sigmund Freud, but with one of the other philosophers, I would tell you that one philosopher, Spinoza, believes that everything that is in the genes will determine what your future will be. If there's a lot of madness in your family, then we have to be careful that you don't become mad. If there's a lot of wickedness in your family, then we have to be careful that you don't become wicked. If there's a lot of goodness in your family, then we can feel good about you, that you're going to have some goodness in you. I don't want to get too far out on that, but every now and then you ought to look up in the gene pool before you decide to get locked into something. You ought to do like the doctors do when you go to get and give them your record. You give them your medical record, then they ask you, did anybody in your family have, and anybody, how old is your mother, and how old is your father, does diabetes, every now and then we ought to say, fill this out, please, and before we go to dinner, fill this out. Amen. We're not going to go there. But the yada suggests then that, and the synonym bin suggests that there is some element of discernment. You can't declare that you are my child and not have some features that indicate that there is a relationship between us. And not only from the gene pool, not only from the physical aspect, but it also is kin to another word, nakar, and this word is to recognize. It has, the other word, bin, had more of a spiritual approach, but nakar is to recognize. That means by my senses, by my sensual perception, I can see there are certain resemblance within the parameters of this family. I was in a restaurant in French West Indies called Le Gaillac, and as I was standing there, somebody came up to me and said to me, total fella from France, said to me, he said, there's some familiarity in your face. And I said, well, who could it be? I mean, I'm all the way down here. He says, are you related at all to Grace Jones? And I said, yes, she happens to be my sister. And he just happened to be the man who saw her looking in a window in New York and asked her, could she get to France to model? And he could see then through the word bin, nakar, he could see or recognize a similarity in features. There's absolutely no way to father a child and they be completely outside of your gene pool. There's absolutely no way to deal with anybody in your bloodline who does not associate with some degree recognizably with you. That brings me to something else. I'll get that down the road. Now, from a physical point of view, yada is used of sexual intercourse. Because again now, remember, it has to do with the sense of knowledge. So when you see the word Adam knew, it is nu or yada Eve, his wife. And that's the same word, because yada now carries with it not only the fruitfulness of the relationship in knowing someone, but the extension of that knowing into the offspring. How might I put this? In a very unique way, whatever we personify is extended to our offspring. And if you end up not liking your offspring after you raise them, just maybe you put too much of yourself in them. And it's you who you don't like in them. We'll leave that alone too. So do you see the evolution? The evolution then becomes obvious, and that is, as I begin to have offspring, I begin to perpetuate who I am. And if I'm good, then I'll have just a whole slew of wonderful ducklings moving down the road with me. If I'm not good, then of course whatever I am to some degree is going to be a part of who they are. Can I make it even more difficult? If I'm not even around, there is going to be some influence, because when the man is not around, there is still influence by him being absent. And oftentimes we try, and many times, and I preach to mothers all the time, never distort or rape the concept that a child has of a father who is not even around. Because in order to stabilize the emotions and to hold together and keep from total psychological destruction and dilapidation, the individual has to form a concept of father. There is nobody here who has been without a father who does not have a concept of what a father should be, or even a wish of what they would have in their own imagination. They wish I had this, or I wish I had that. The evolution is clear, but we've got to add another dimension, because yada is also used of the most intimate acquaintances. So Adam yadas Eve and is rewarded with a son who yada in the spirit, that's discerned, and who is physically recognized like Adam. And so now Adam is recognized in Seth, and Adam is discerned in Seth. Not only do I see you from a physical image, but I feel your discerning spirit. I can tell that you belong to so and so because of the way you are, and because of the way you think, your psychological disposition, your intellectual capacity, your cognitive energy and ability. I see what family you came out of. You're stuck up just like your daddy. You think you're the cat's meow like your mother, because there's absolutely no way for you to raise somebody outside of your mindset, your philosophies, your psychological strength and enhancement or debilitation, depending on what it is. So now Adam then is recognized in Seth and is discerned in Seth. And so here is the word yada as an acquaintance. To know Seth is to be acquainted with Adam. Can I take it further? Can I take it further? If this continues from line to line, and if it's negative, it becomes quite intensive.